Hi guys, trust you're well. Thank you for the session this morning. So this is just a quick video to illustrate to you the importance of being an assessor and why it is important for you to understand what the principles of assessment is. So I'm quickly going to go through with you the process of building your portfolio when it comes through to the outcomes-based assessment part of it, right? So we're not talking about the design and develop one right now. We're talking about the assessor course. So when you're doing the assessor course, or when you're an assessor or a candidate assessor, you must always keep in mind that you will be playing two roles during this process. It's very important. The first role that you, or the first function that will be your responsibility is that you are a student or a learner, depending on what you want to call yourself. And then the second function that you are going to act as is a candidate assessor. So you need to understand these two roles and you need to separate them. So when we get to your portfolio building will consist of two areas or two aspects, right? So the first aspect that we're going to look at is from a learner perspective, right? You are now the learner. So when we are completing our portfolio, your task will be to complete all the necessary documents, to complete all the documentation, right? So that's the first thing, and that's from an IQ perspective. That's your first role. So once you're done with completing all the necessary documents that I'll send you, you will then take on the second role. So there'll be a file divider in your POE that will clearly indicate that you have now played the role of a learner. So you've accomplished all of this. And this includes the knowledge questions that you have to complete, right? Once we've got that sorted out, we now need to do our sample. Now your work sample will include you administering at least 2 assessments. There must be 2 assessments that you will be administering. As I explained to you guys during our session, you can use anyone that you choose to for the assessing of it. So the assessments that we're going to use, the first one will be an exam. The second one that we'll use is either an observation assessment or we'll do a formative assessment, which is then equal to a workbook. Now you must remember this. When you are assessing a candidate or a learner, when you're playing your second role as candidate assessor now, your learner will need to complete all the requirements that's expected from you. All the requirements. And what I'm talking about here is, first of all, there needs to be an enrollment form. Secondly, you need a CV. Thirdly, you need a copy of the ID document. Fourthly, you need a register that shows that the learner has attended and is writing this assessment. And then the last one, and there might be more, I'll send it to you. The last thing is now that you need to administer the assessment. Now I want you guys to keep in mind, when you have done or when you completed the design and develop unit standard, design and develop means you are now learning how to design an assessment tool and you are developing the assessment tool. So the same assessment that you've used for your design and develop unit standard, we are going to use for the assessor unit standard. But we are going to add to that. Right. So what you'll receive is, firstly, the written assessment, which is the exam. The second one that you'll receive will be the observation. Now, depending on the choice that I make for you on your behalf, it will either be observation or it will be a formative workbook. Okay, so it will be either one of these two. But the condition is, and it's a specific requirement, that there must be 2 assessments and you need to show your competence as an assessor. So I'll work through your workbooks, your assessing with you. Now the question is, how do I assess? I'm an assessor. I need to assess. I've received my assessment and I've got my marking memo. You guys remember you need to have a marking memo as well. So now your learner has completed the written assessment. Now you need to assess it. Now for this one, I'm going to write out a sentence or a paragraph, and I'll show you exactly how you need to mark this assessment. Alright, so now you've administered the assessment. You had various assessment questions. The example here could be in the form of a workbook, which is a formative assessment, or it can be an exam. So if it's an exam, this is what you'd receive from your student. You've got your question, which is question 1, and it's what is an agenda? Now remember, there's 2 questions being asked here. The first question is, what is an agenda? And the second thing they need to answer is, they need to list 5 items that's included in an agenda. So when you're assessing, you need to look for what the question is asking and whether the student has correctly answered that question. And when it's for 5 marks, you need to have 5 ticks, right? So what I mean by ticks is, you'll then read the question, what is an agenda? The student has answered, an agenda is a list of items that needs to be discussed during a meeting, and that's correct, right? He has now answered that question. And then they need to list 5 items. Now you're sitting with a dilemma. You've got 5 marks, but you've got 6 ticks that you need to add to this. So what do? You tick. First one is correct, 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 correct. And then because the learner has achieved all 5 marks, you then award him 5 marks, which you will state in your answer like that. Right, so you've given him 5. Now when you completed every single page of your assessment, you must always remember that you need to initial every page. Very importantly, you need to initial every page of the entire assessment and supporting documents. What does that mean? Supporting documents will be a copy of your ID, the CV, whatever else the learner needs to include in their portfolio. You need to initial every page. So at the end of the page, you will put a tick to agree that you agree with the page that was submitted. You're now validating this assessment and you're putting your initial. Very important. Without this, there's no validation or verification that the learner has actually performed well in the assessment. So now what happens if the learner does not achieve all of his required marks? Let's say, for instance, he only does this. He only gives you those 5. What do you do now? Because you're still sitting with 5 marks and the learner has given you 5 marks, you can then now award him 5 marks. But now you need to give learner feedback. Learner feedback is very important in terms of an assessment. So you will write in your assessment report or on the page itself, you will write you have answered this assessment correctly, but please note that one portion of your question has not been attempted. I've awarded you 5 marks for your attempt. Right? So you always need to look at what's being given and give proper feedback. I can't stress I don't even know how to stress this, is the importance of feedback. For every single assessment, you need to give feedback. Feedback is extremely important. So you can either give feedback on the assessment itself when you're marking the assessment, or in your assessor feedback report. That is extremely important. So that's one of the ways in which you assess an assessment. What's very important as well for us to remember is when it comes to your pre-assessment meeting, when it comes to your assessment planning, and you'll have all your documentation with you, or I'll send it to you, where you need to complete your pre-assessments, you need to have pre-assessment meetings with your learner. And remember, guys, whenever you assess an assessment, you must, at the bottom of each page, you must tick that you've assessed it, and you must put your initial, whatever your initial is. Right, so learner feedback, you'll get your feedback forms. It's quite easy to understand, and it's straightforward. The importance of this video for you guys specifically is to understand how do you assess and what I want to see when I receive your POEs back. So remember this, please. Important. You will be playing 2 roles during your assessment. One as a learner and one as a candidate assessor. And I will then mark you, or I will assess your work based on these 2 components. But I'll clearly highlight and clearly indicate what it is that you need to do. So I'll be sending you additional videos to accompany this one. So I hope I didn't do too bad a job, and I don't disappoint you in terms of what you expected to see in terms of a facilitator. But this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to complete our portfolios. And then we'll meet again at our next session. And with that, I want to wish you guys all the best and good luck. And I will be corresponding with you shortly. Thanks, guys.